Bernie Sanders continues to stand in the shadow of one Joe Biden, who, based on recent polling, still maintains, for the most part, the same lead that he had prior. Warren still stands in the shadow of one Bernie Sanders, who's essentially been able to make herself into the number 3 spot after for a short stint of time where Kamala Harris had kind of got a bump after the last debate. Interestingly enough, if you add Sanders and Warren together, they would for the most part equal what Joe Biden has. To some degree, Warren is splitting the vote. Now, this was expected to some degree. I mean, going back almost a year ago. But I think we're seeing this in the polling result. Warren is splitting the vote. Interestingly enough, even more interesting than the splitting of the vote, because like I said, that was more so expected. Warren often gets lumped in with Sanders as being the lefties in this race. Despite them being lumped in together, there are differences in the voting blocks that are voting for Sanders and are voting for Warren. And in some cases, those are stark differences, surprising differences. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. And, Morning Consult continuously does polling throughout the course of the election. And they give you these kind of snapshots of where the public's mind is at any particular moment during the course of the election. I've said that this far out, the polling is here nor there, but as the debates take place, the polling starts to get a little bit more crystallized in regards to what the public is thinking. We've had the first debate. The second debate is coming up. Now, the first debate saw a few things take place. Elizabeth Warren was on stage by herself for all intents and purposes, and in domestic policy, she shined. When they got to foreign policy, you didn't even know she was still on stage. In the second debate, Kamala Harris goes after one Joe Biden and gets a bump in the polls because of such. Now, what I want to show is the recent polling in the race that took place on the 15th to now. It's weird and interesting in regards to the coalitions that the candidates are pulling together in order to pursue their case through the primaries. Sanders and Warren being the 1 and 2 spot is somewhat momentous. The two lefties in the race, literally, if you add them together, would be winning this race, or at the very least be tying this race. But instead, they're splitting their vote. But whether they're splitting the vote or not, I guess my point is, at what once was radical is now a large contingent of the party. And you can even argue in the primaries itself, again, if they were lumped together, would be either a majority or, at the very least, an equal coalition to the corporate class within the party. That is new. I've said often that there's an interregnum within the party, that there is a vying for the leadership of the established order of the party. The establishment wing of the party does not have as much control over the party as I think people think they do. And this is kind of getting that across. I don't think Joe Biden is going to make it through this primary. Even though he may be looking relatively strong right now, his polling has dropped. Even within the states, it has continuously dropped. He's been a falling rock. Look at this. So, two things. First, currently, Joe Biden remains in lead. The polling conducted with Biden with 33% support. Sanders came in second with 18%. Warren, 14%. Harris, 13%. Now, look at the support, though. Look at who's supporting who, and look at the breakdown. Elizabeth Warren is a woman, and you would expect women to support her. Fair enough. 60%. That pans out. Sanders gets 50% for men and women. He gets an equal share of his support for men and women. That's fascinating. I love that. Joe Biden gets a deviation in women. In fact, everybody else in the race gets a deviation towards women. Harris, Warren, and Biden. Sanders gets an equal distribution of 2. Right on. Look at this part, though. White. Sanders holds his own. Even though Elizabeth Warren wins that in spades. That's amazing. That's amazing. Then you go for black. Sanders holds his own with everybody else in the race. In fact, he's only number 2. Now, for all of those people who tell you, oh, he can't get the black vote, he's not going to get the minority vote, I understand all of these people are white. No. Sanders does not get the white vote. Look at this. At least not, well, I'll explain what I mean. He holds his own with the white vote, but he get an outshare of the black and the Hispanic vote, while continuously holding his own with the white vote. When Sanders gets out there and he says Donald Trump is a racist, he can say that for another reason. Look at this. Men, the white male vote that the Democratic Party continuously screams that it needs, so it needs to go further to the right, Sanders gets. He just gets it. And he gets that even calling himself a socialist. Warren loses the male vote. And in odd way, so does Joe Biden. Sanders gets a lot of his support from blacks and Hispanic. Or at the very least, you can say he gets outside support from blacks and Hispanics, despite the fact that they're telling you that he's the white candidate. Isn't that amazing? You talk about propaganda. Propaganda continuously tells you that Bernie Sanders is the white candidate, and yet, of everybody else in the race, for the top four, he has the least amount of the white vote. And they tell you that he can't get minorities, and yet he has an outsized support for minorities. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Talk about propaganda. They breathlessly told you that he was the white candidate. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing. Here's another interesting tidbit. Less college. Sanders. He wins the less than college vote, the under 4-year vote. That makes sense. He's calling for economics. He's calling for this notion of resources to the bottom share of the society, meaning a society built by the 99%, not by the 1%. That does make sense that the bottom share of the society will say, yes, I like a society where we're not struggling constantly. Yes, I like that society. And that shows in the polling. He's acknowledged for it. People without a college degree love him. Because his argument is just because you don't have a college degree, it doesn't mean you should struggle. Life should not be about continuously not having your needs met. That's his argument. And it pans out. Interestingly enough, though, Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden's, the propaganda around, the politics around Joe Biden is, he's an everyman. And so they look at him as such, less than college. They honestly believe that corporatists is working for their benefit. That's so sad. But the majority, at the very least, get Sanders. Look at Warren, 43%. 43%. And you know the wild part about that and the sad part about that? Between Warren and Biden, Warren's domestic programs are infinitely better than Biden's. Isn't that sad? Like, this is literally propaganda at work. Joe Biden is considered an everyman. So for people without a college degree, he gets 61%. They at the very least recognize that Sanders is looking out for their best benefit and gets 66%. Warren gets 43%, despite her domestic programs being infinitely better than one Mr. Joe Biden, who's going to look out for Wall Street and his 1% buddies. That's profoundly sad. That's profoundly sad. But look at the disparity between Sanders and Warren. 63% to 43% from the standpoint of people with not a college degree. When you give people an education or they get a college degree, it goes down to 34%. To some degree, that also makes sense. Because from their standpoint, I don't want you raising my taxes. I got my college degree. I don't want you raising my taxes. It matters less to them because they're in a better situation from the standpoint of society. This is called self-interest. From the people, from their self-interest standpoint, they're looking out for their own benefit. 57% say, once they're college, okay, that's wrong. I'm sorry, that's wrong. Scratch that. That's true to a certain extent, but scratch that. That's the wrong argument. 57%, 34%. This is a weird dichotomy. And I gotta be honest, I'm not quite sure why that exists. I mean, from a domestic front, they may identify more with Warren. I mean, she's more professorial. She's coming out of Massachusetts, etc. And she's more wonkish, I guess, from the standpoint of the way she talks about things. So maybe it's coming from that. I'm not quite sure. Where Sanders is more of a populist rage of sorts, even though he does have the domestic programs. And maybe they look at it as because she has a policy for everything, they feel more akin to her and more at home with her. I don't know. I don't know what caused that disparity. In Sanders' case, Sanders calls on a more populist rage, even though he does have policy and programs. And to some degree, if you enwrap a person in the politics of it, maybe they look at him as having less policy and more angst and anger of sorts. This is an interesting disparity between the two. Because in all honesty, Sanders came first. And Sanders has one policy after the next for pretty much everything that he brings up. Warren is a Johnny-come-lately with the policy stuff, even though she has domestic policies for all sorts of stuff. You would think that these numbers would be closer together, that's all. Seeing as their perspective and the policies that these guys push are to the left. What you find, though, is the people who see Sanders and Biden, in some respects, oddly enough, end up together in the polling results. Like, look at this. College educated. Look at Sanders and Biden, almost together. Less than college. Look at Sanders and Biden, almost together. It starts breaking down when you get to race. And when you get to age. Look at this. Less than 45. 45 and less. Sanders kills the entire competition. Nobody's even close. Nobody's close. Then you get to greater than 45. Sanders loses out to everybody. He loses out to everybody. If you're older than 45, you're with Biden by 72%. Biden, nobody's even close to Biden. The next closest person is Harris, which is the weirdest thing in the world to me. I have no idea why. Same thing with her on Warren. I have no idea why. People were saying there was a certain excitement around Warren and Harris as being new faces within the party, meaning people have seen Sanders and Biden before, and so there's more of an excitement and energy around Harris and Warren. They're the newbies in the race, in which case people are giving them a shot, like essentially looking them over. But if you're 45 and older and you're looking for people who are going to fight for your health care, fight for your Social Security and everything else, it's kind of weird that you don't choose Sanders in that. This is the most bizarre thing in the world to me. Obama was talking about cutting Social Security. And look at Biden at 72%. Propaganda is a bitch, man. However, the youth get it. To some degree, that makes sense. They're on Facebook, they're on social media. They're not necessarily ensconced in the mainstream media, so the people who they're looking at, they have an opportunity to actually look at information and policy and so forth. Like, they're more on it. They're more engaged. That's the only thing I can think of why the youth will be for it. Not to mention, Sanders has been strong about college and so forth. So, But this one is weird to me because Sanders has been fighting for Social Security and expanding Medicaid and Medicare and all this other stuff. By the same token, they will be the people who are least engaged, who are most involved in mainstream media, if that makes sense. Like 45 and older are less engaged in social media. They're less likely to be involved in something that is not a mainstream media platform. They will be the ones who are still watching television, and they're watching MSNBC trash Sanders. They're watching CNN trash Sanders. The youth are not. They're not. Our TV is not even hooked up. Our TV is not even hooked up. We just have internet. This is but the deviation is so weird. I mean, even among the youth vote, Warren comes in second, but she's 20 points away. By the same token, the same deviation happens with the elderly vote for Sanders. This is so weird in the results. And again, for whites, even though Sanders is the white candidate, he gets the least amount of the white vote. I suspect if you broke this down by white men, I suspect that he would probably get just as much of a total as Joe Biden on this front. By the same token, the moment that you go to women, his total remains the same, but the other people around him changes. It's fascinating. I'm fascinated by this polling results. By the way, what this does mean, however, is that Sanders and Warren would be a winning ticket. If they were working together as opposed to being in the election against one another, it would be a winning ticket. If Sanders could somehow knock Warren out of the race early and say that she's going to be my vice president, he'll be the better for it. Those people who are going to support Warren would immediately jump to Sanders' side, considering that the policy for the most part are extremely similar, and she's saying, vote for my guy. Not to mention, there's no friction between the two. It's not like Clinton and Sanders that became a huge amount of animosity between the two people. These two sides, for the most part, are not at conflict either in policy or even at hitting one another. By the same token, nothing Warren is talking about is going to get accomplished. Now, I got to be honest, I don't even believe that Warren can be Trump. But nothing she's going to do is going to get accomplished because she seems to think of this in a wonkish position, as if you can just get in governance and govern and get what you want to accomplish just through the act of governance. Nonsense. When Sanders is screaming for political revolution, he's not doing it purely because he's angry. He's doing it because he understands that from a political standpoint, in order to get congressional leaders to do stuff that they don't necessarily want to do and that their donors are telling them not to do, you need people screaming at them, yelling at them to do so. They need to understand that they can lose their jobs. And I guarantee you that they care more about their jobs than they do about the cash that is being put into their pocket, because they're taking the cash in their pockets for their jobs anyway. I hope you understand what I mean. You have dollars, they have pitchforks. And in this case, this notion that you're going to govern just through wonkishness, I'm sorry, that's not going to work. It makes me feel good that at the very least from the standpoint of the left, it's a question on the establishment of the party itself and whether or not they can maintain power. It's disheartening to see that I was right and that she was indeed going to split the vote. And that is exactly what's happening. And if you're asking me, why do I say that she's splitting the vote? I'm saying that because this is a world built by Sanders, and she's standing in his shadow, and she stood in his shadow the entirety of this race. She's never taken second place in this race, and she remains in that spot. That's why I said it that way. Until that changes, I will say she's in his shadow. Now, there's one other part. Biden's lead in the states has shrunk. He's leading 33-21 in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, and Nevada. And that lead in those states has gone down. The lead in those states has gone down. We're 2 years out. We're a year and a half out. And he's already losing ground. In some respect, he lost 9 points in one of those races. And if you look back at the polling when he first got into the race, it has been a falling stone ever since. Sanders has remained in number 2. Biden is not going to make it through this primary. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. Policy is not the thing that people are electing Biden on. Electability is what they're electing Biden on. I have no idea what electability is. I know what it's supposed to mean, but I have no idea what it actually is. I don't think that lasts to a Democratic primary. That's all. So we'll see. Again, I could be wrong, but we'll see. We'll see. All right. I have one more that I want to do before tonight. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to share. Thanks all.